Whenever I start a presentation, I try to give credit where it is due. And one of my favorite heroes is Butter Bob Briggs. And you know Butter Bob Briggs, and you and I are both fans of his. He's not a physician, he's just like any other person, no medical training. But Butter Bob has done such good work and has inspired millions of people across the world, changed their lives. Because he's got a very scientific mind, and I'm taking a lot of his work. As a physician, I learn from non-physicians. Anybody in this day and age with access to the internet and an inquisitive mind can learn. The one thing I want to tell you about Butter Bob is that he disappeared in 2016. His website has not changed. I have written to him several times. I've told him, Butter Bob, I admire you. Please come to Low Carb Houston. He's not responded. Many people have said something may have happened to him. I don't know. I hope not. And many people write saying that something happened to Butter Bob's, and yes, because of that, a low carb diet is not good. Okay? So I want you to dispel that myth. You know, something can happen to me. You know, I'm a low carb physician. I've been practicing it for 5 years. But nutrition is only one aspect of our health. Stress, sleep, genetics, many other factors determine our health. So if something happens to me, I want the movement of low carb to continue. Okay, so that about Butter Bob Briggs. Megan Ramos is an expert in fasting, and this thing was supposed to be a little bit up, but anyway, she is going to be here. The reason I put up Dr. Stephen Phinney is that sometimes you learn from contrarians. Dr. Phinney says fasting is one of the worst things you can do for you. Okay? And when you hear somebody like that, instead of closing your mind, if you have an open mind, you see their arguments and see how you can improve from those arguments and improve your fasting techniques. So that's why I have Dr. Phinney's work also highlighted today. Okay, so let me ask you guys a question. There have been a lot of fasting studies done in animals, in rats and primates. So they took a bunch of rats. Dr. Mark Mattson, who is at the National Institute of Aging, took a group of rats and he said, I'm going to make them not eat on alternate days. Eat one day, the alternate day, give them a short period, only 25% of their calories. What do you think happened to the rats?
Lost weight. Oh, cholesterol instead of about that.
So different people are coming up with different kind of ideas, but let's say a rat's lifespan is 6 months. How long did the rats that fasted live? Shorter, longer? Longer. How much longer? Somebody said 3 months? So on an average of 3 to 6 months. So their lifespan extended or almost doubled. There is some information available in primates, but this information is not available in humans. So we have to extrapolate. We have to look at surrogate markers, and that's what we're going to do. So when you do fasting, what you're essentially trying to do is to get into ketosis. Ketosis means that instead of burning carbohydrates, instead of burning sugar, you're burning fat. So there are ways to get into ketosis, which is nutritional, that is eating a low carb diet, exercise, but today we're going to focus on fasting. We've gone through this Zucker rat many times, but sometimes redundancy is important. A Zucker rat is an animal model of high insulin levels. These animals have high insulin levels, and when you have high insulin levels, you don't have the same satiety signals of stopping to eat. So when the Zucker mouse is given food without limitation, it gets fat, and that's a normal mouse by comparison. But if a Zucker mouse's calories are restricted, in other words, you give him the same amount of calories as the less or the normal mice, does he get obese? Does he get fat? He does get fat. What happens to his activity? His activity goes down. He just sits in one place. Now let's say we take the experimental conditions further and restrict his calories to about 80% of the calories that a normal mice is eating. Does it still get fat? It does get fat at the expense of eating it into his muscles, into his brain, into his heart. Because to serve the fat tissue, to serve the adipose tissue, it is going to compromise on other things, and it's going to cannibalize its own organs to get fat. So this is a picture of a lady who is a type 1 diabetic, and she puts insulin in one leg out on one day and another leg another day, and she's done this for 30 years. And you see fat depositions on her leg, and that's the local action of insulin in promoting fat. So what I'm trying to tell you is that high insulin levels make you retain fat, hold on to fat, and promote adipose tissue. Now, I ask you guys to start eating like this because this is the low carb, high fat way of eating: lard, butter, cream cheese, chicken with the skin on, fatty fish, fatty meat, bacon, marbled meat. And as you know, when you eat like this, your good cholesterol is going to go up, your triglycerides are going to go down. And although as you get healthy, your LDL cholesterol is going to go up, it's going to improve in quality. The reason I put this up is because of the next slide. That is not how we eat. How Americans eat is that they have a bunch of sugar, bread, and they mix these two with vegetable oil, which is one of the worst things possible because vegetable oil is chemically processed at high temperatures. Go ahead.
Just some quick trivia. Does anybody know what Crisco stands for? Oh boy.
No.
Go ahead.
Crystallized cottonseed oil.
Crystallized cottonseed oil.
Wow.
It was invented as a soap in the beginning, and when they found that it was something that people could use instead of butter, that's how it got marketed. And it's very high in omega-6. It's highly inflammatory. I fear for the vegans and the vegetarians because they don't eat butter and they don't take lard. They cook in vegetable oil. That's one of the most unhealthy things somebody could do. And when you mix this two, you get a donut, and basically,
And then you put jelly in.
and in addition to that, you put jelly or you put sugary fruit.
Chocolate.
60% of American calories are coming from this trifecta of grains, added sugar, or plant oils. And when you do that, your good cholesterol goes down, the fat in blood goes up, your LDL doesn't go up, so your doctor is happy saying that you're doing something right, but the LDL is of very poor quality. But what is happening to you is on the last big arrow that's going up, and that's called severe insulin resistance. When you eat like that, your insulin levels go skyrocket. They go very high. What percentage of American population is insulin resistant?
90.
So when you look at it, it's very high. 70%. So if I check insulin, and we do, my office does it a lot, Shalini does it a lot, Melissa does it a lot, there is Nina and Georgie, they do it a lot, and we find that more than 70% of our patients have high insulin levels. Why are high insulin levels bad? They are bad because they make you obese. They are bad because they cause toxic hunger. Insulin prevents you from seeing satiety signals in the brain, and it makes you overeat. In addition to that, it causes diabetes, heart disease, dementia, cancers, many other bad things. All right, what happens to your insulin levels as you become heavier? a person cannot get heavier without high insulin levels. So this is a study done. They took normal lean, normal obese. These are obese people who have glucose intolerance, so sugar intolerance. These are type 1 diabetics with sugars less than 140, and these are type 2 diabetics with sugars less than 140, and type 2 diabetics with sugars greater than 140. So as you are getting heavier and as your diabetes is getting worse, you are getting higher and higher insulin levels. In fact, if you take a diabetic who's burnt out, let's say you've been a type 2 diabetic for 20 years and your pancreas is now no longer working and your doctor is giving you insulin. When you start taking insulin, is your weight going to go up or go down? It's going to go up, because that insulin is going to make you eat more and deposit more fat. So the question that comes about is that why is it that there are people amongst us, isn't that Bill? Hey Bill. Why is it that some of us can eat all the sugar and refined carbs that we want and not get fat and look just like Clark Gable? I think that's Clark Gable out there. And why can some of us eat the same stuff and get quite heavy? Now, have you thought about that?
There's genetics involved, probably.
So I think that there are many factors, but I think the single most important factor is how your gut works, how your stomach works. So here it is. This is a diagram of the stomach, and the stomach empties into the duodenum, and right here in the duodenum are a certain group of cells that release a peptide which is called GIP, gastrointestinal peptide. So when you eat food, the GIP releases into the circulation, and it goes to the pancreas and it says jack up insulin production. So why some of us do not get fat by eating carbs is because in them the GIP response is muted. They don't make much GIP, whereas some of us 70% of us make such high GIP that our insulin levels go up, and depending on how insulin levels go up, the heavier you would get. So this is a diagram out here that is showing the release of gastrointestinal peptide, and out here at the lower portion is a person who's getting the same amount of sugar, but the sugar is put in through the vein. So in other words, sugar put in through the vein should increase your insulin production, right?
Yes.
But it doesn't. It doesn't as much as sugar that you eat, because the sugar that you eat will go to the pancreas through the GIP. In other words, it goes through your stomach, the GIP goes and tells your pancreas, jack up insulin production. So eating sugar and carbohydrates increases insulin production more than mainlining your sugar. Now, many people become heavy and they opt for this easy fix, which is called gastric bypass surgery. When you go through gastric bypass surgery, it is one of the most effective ways, even before you lose weight. Within the first 1 week, even before you lose weight, within the first 1 week, your sugar comes to normal if you are a diabetic, and your insulin levels fall. They fall dramatically. So this is what's happening. You're taking the stomach and you're cutting it out here, and instead of going through the duodenum, you are bypassing the duodenum and you're connecting it straight down the road into the lower part of the intestine called the jejunum. So when you bypass the duodenum, you bypass the GIP producing cells, so the GIP decreases and hence your insulin levels tank down. And when your insulin levels tank down, you don't get hungry, you get early satiety, and your pancreatic function improves. After hearing this, please don't go and try to opt for gastric bypass surgery, because it's one of the worst things you can do for yourself. It has many vitamin deficiencies, iron deficiencies, B12 deficiencies, in addition to risking your health in other ways. There are much better ways of doing what a gastric bypass surgery does. Now, all this slide is showing you is that this is a person with gastric bypass surgery before their surgery, and that is their insulin levels. 1 week after surgery, their insulin levels have come down. This is an insulin axis. That's all it is showing. The patient in 1 week has not really lost much weight, but their insulin levels come down because of what the bypass surgeon does. Okay, so they drop much before. All right. This is Butter Bob, and I tell you, I have taken some of his slides. So imagine a board-certified interventional cardiologist learning from Butter Bob. And I don't say that lightly, because this is a man I respect and admire. So he does a lot of literature search, and what he's saying is that as your body weight increases, as you go from thin, normal, overweight to obese, your insulin levels go up. As your waist to height ratio increases, as your belly increases in size, your insulin levels go up. Very clear definition of that. This is the work of Dr. Joseph Kraft. He worked for 50 years in a Chicago hospital, and he did 15,000 glucose tolerance tests. How many of you have had a glucose tolerance test? A few. So you drink a bunch of sugar solution, and if you go to an endocrinologist, all they will do is check your sugar at 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, and 4 hours. That is not what Dr. Kraft did. In addition to checking sugars, he also checked insulin levels. He checked them in 15,000 people over 40 years. Of the 15,000 people, he found 10,000 had normal glucose tolerance test. Okay, in other words, these people will be considered by endocrinologists, non-diabetic, you're fine, you go home, you have not a problem. Okay? 15,000 he did, 10,000 he found them to be normal. Of the 10,000, only 2,000 had normal amounts of insulin secreted during the 6-hour interval. So this is the normal amount of insulin, fasting insulin, half an hour 59, 1 hour 61, and then coming back to normal at 5 hours. So of the 10,000, only 2,000 had normal insulin profile. The other 8,000 had some version of high insulin levels, and this is the worst pattern, the Kraft pattern 4, and in pattern 4, their insulin levels were 4-fold higher. So that's why I tell you, one of the most common problems that is leading to heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, strokes, is high insulin levels. So Butter Bob is further defining in here that when you do a glucose tolerance test, the thin people make less insulin, the obese people not only make more insulin, but their fasting insulin levels are higher. And not only are they higher, but they don't come down to normal, and they remain high for a long period of time. What is the one macronutrient you can eat? What's the one macronutrient that you can eat that does not increase your insulin levels? Fat, right? Okay, so right here it is protein also increases, but fat doesn't. Okay? So many of you will ask me, I have started eating like this, but I have not lost weight. Okay? You know, I get people say, I have a plateau, I'm eating a low carb, high fat diet, but I'm not losing weight. Why is it happening? The reason it's happening is because your insulin levels are high to begin with. When you eat, they go higher if you're obese. This is the normal person. Here is the obese person. And not all of your insulin is being released in response to food. 50% of your insulin is released as basal insulin secretion, and the heavier you are, the more insulin we get released. So in this study, they looked at 24-hour insulin, and they found that 50% of insulin in normal people and 45% of insulin in heavy people is released not in response to food, but is released as basal insulin secretion. So this is a very important point for us to understand. If your basal insulin level is high to begin with, you're not going to be burning fat. You are not going to be losing weight, even though you are on a low carb diet. So that's why people who go on a low carb diet, if their insulin levels are high to begin with, they're not going to have as much benefit. So as Butterbob says, your basal insulin, which is sometimes also called fasting insulin, is 40 to 50% of the amount of insulin that your body is producing on a regular basis. A ketogenic diet alone will not help you, since 50% of your insulin is not in response to any of this food. It's happening at a basal level. So this is a complicated slide, but I'm going to walk you through it. All right. So here is sugar response. This person is eating a standard American diet. This person is eating a carbohydrate-free diet, and this person is doing fasting. So here is a 24-hour scale. Standard American diet, the sugars are going up and down, as you would expect. A low-carb diet, the sugars are not going up as much. They are still higher. But which diet is reducing your sugar levels the most? It's fasting. Not eating is reducing your sugar levels much more dramatically. Sugar and insulin go hand in hand. This is the same slide, but with the insulin response. This is the standard diet. This is the carbohydrate-free diet. This is the diet in which person is fasting. This is the insulin spikes that are happening with the standard diet. These are the insulin spikes that are happening, but the basal amount of insulin is not changed as much with a carbohydrate-free diet. But what is dropping your insulin the most in there? Fasting. Fasting is 50% more effective than a low-carb diet at dropping your insulin. So here it is. I put that slide up big. Low carb reduces 50% from a standard American diet, but fasting reduces it another 50%.
So Doc, is that because you're maybe giving your body a chance to work the way it's supposed to work by not overloading it with stuff, so to speak?
Absolutely correct. You're giving it a rest, and your pancreas gets a chance to recover and reset itself. So, all right. Now I've shown some versions of the slides to you guys.
Yeah.
If you drain the entire blood in my body, 5 liters, and you measure the amount of sugar in it, our body controls the amount of sugar very tightly. In a normal person, it'll be 1 teaspoon, 5 grams. Our liver can store only about 100 grams of carbs that our brain can use, and muscles can store about 300 grams, but the muscles don't give it to the brain to use. They're stingy, they keep it themselves. So basically, you only have 100 grams of stored carbs. So we can store only about 100 grams of carbs because muscle glycogen is reserved for the muscles. What about fat? How much fat can we store? Clark Gable in 1960, 165 pounds. With the way we are eating the standard American diet with sugar, grains, and vegetable oils, we have become roughly about 30 pounds heavier in 2018. An average person has 63 pounds of fat compared to a quarter of a pound of glycogen as sugar as stored fuel. Our bodies were designed to run on fat. They were not designed to run on sugar. So you need to make your body run on fat. So when you stop eating carbs, your body then takes the fat that you're eating or the fat that you have accumulated, it puts it into the bloodstream, the liver converts it into small molecules which are called ketones that can be used by your muscle, your heart, and your brain, and that's about 20% of your fuel supply. In other words, the ketones are reserved for the brain, but the rest of the body, the muscles, cannot just use ketones, they can use triglycerides from the fat themselves. So what happens when you fast? So this is a person who did 40 days of fasting. And by the way, I want to tell you about prolonged fasting. 40 days only water and salt. Here is sugar, 5 millimoles, that's 90 milligrams per deciliter in American terms. The sugar dropped within the first 3 days to about 70, a little over 3.8 or something, but remained there. The sugar did not drop any further. Why did the sugar not drop any further? This person is not eating at all. Where are they making sugar from? We can store only 100 grams of sugar. Where are they getting that sugar from? So you get the sugar by not utilizing it first. So your utilization goes down because you're burning fat and you're converting fat. There's a glycerol molecule in fat which gets converted to sugar. But the other sugar is being derived from breaking your muscles down. The muscles, the protein in your body, amino acids are released, and through a process called gluconeogenesis, your body can make all the sugar that it needs. Our body is very smart. Is it going to make sugar and burn sugar at the same time? It's not. So when it's making sugar, it stops burning sugar, it starts burning fat. How do we know that this person is burning fat? We know that this person is burning fat because the beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is a ketone body, it's a breakdown product of fat, slowly starts increasing and gets up to about 5 millimoles. So if I take you guys and I say, we are going to fast, and none of you are going to eat anything because I'm going to keep you in a room where there is no access to food. Will you feel hungry the first day? Yes. Will you feel hungry the second day? Yes. Will you feel hungry the third day? Maybe. What will happen on the fourth day? You will get up and you will say, God, where am I getting all this damn energy from? Why do I feel so good? Where is this energy coming from? And the energy is coming because your body has ramped up the breakdown of fat and your beta-hydroxybutyrate levels are so high that you're fat burning and you are no longer hungry because your insulin levels have tanked down. They have gone down like crazy. So fatty acids, which is fat, start getting released at about 3 hours. But really, if you want to accentuate the release of fatty acids, you have to not fast for 10 hours. I mean, you have to not eat for 10 hours, not fast for 10 hours. Okay. Ketone bodies start increasing at about 3 to 5 hours, but really they don't ramp up until about 12 to 15 hours. So that's why you need to figure out how long to fast. I'm putting this up. Butter Bob has done a beautiful job putting these slides up so that we can understand how long to fast. Insulin levels start going down in 3 hours, but really you start seeing them tanking down right at about 10 hours. That tells us how long to fast. That's why you and I are his fans. So this is supposed to be what? I'm sorry. What are the dangers of fasting? I just made these slides a few minutes before I finished. The dangers of fasting are that insulin levels will go down, ketone levels will go up, hunger goes down, there is weight loss, there is improved blood pressure. So these are the benefits. Are there different types of fasting? You're right, they're not dangers, they're benefits.
Right.
I don't know why I wrote that.
That's all right, it's good. That's good, I like that. Low blood sugar.
So, I guess I'm not running on ketones. So, are there different types of fasting? And I put this up, highlighted up, because this is the only type of fasting that I recommend, 18 to 24 hours without food. There's multi-day fasting, there's fasting longer than 3 days, 5 days a week of eating and 2 days of fasting, which is the Michael Mosley method. Monday and Thursday you fast, the other 5 days you eat. There's something also called alternate day fasting, which you can also call as intermittent fasting. But really what I recommend is an 18-hour fast. Okay, and I'll tell you more about that in later. So here is where Dr. Finney comes into play. So Dr. Finney, yes, please go ahead.
So what's the chances of developing peptic ulcer or duodenal ulcer by not eating for how many days?
You will heal your stomach by not eating, and you will heal your peptic ulcer because when you're not eating, you won't make stomach acid. And if you don't make stomach acid, your stomach is going to heal. You're going to mess up your stomach by eating carbohydrates. And if I can tell you, I had given a presentation here that has been watched over 1,000 times. It's called Why Stomach Acid is Important for You. So when you go back, you're going to look up my name and you're going to look up that talk and you're going to review it. Okay. So we said, yes, go ahead.
What about if you type 2 diabetic taking insulin?
That's a very good point. But when you are a type 2 diabetic and you're taking insulin, if you're on a low carb diet and if you're fasting, your insulin requirements in the first 2 days are going to drop by half. So anybody who's a type 2 diabetic who goes on a low carb diet, who starts fasting, they need to keep checking their sugars and reduce the dose of their insulin and reduce the dose of the drugs that jack up insulin from your pancreas, because if you don't do that, you're going to get hypoglycemic or you're going to binge eat. So that's an important point, and I'll get to that a little bit more, and I wish that you would ask that question again in the end. So Dr. Finney says that we make a distinction between nutritional ketosis, that is getting into ketone bodies by not eating carbs, versus fasting ketosis. When done correctly, nutritional ketosis is achieved while maintaining lean tissue protein. In other words, you're protecting your muscle mass. In contrast, fasting ketosis reduces your resting metabolism. So in other words, your metabolism slows down so you don't lose as much weight. You will lose muscle mass because you're breaking down muscle, and you can affect muscles and heart because they are made up of lean tissue. So Dr. Finney is saying, hey, Dr. Jason Fung, hey, Megan Ramos, you're wrong. Don't go out and tell people to fast because they are going to get into trouble because they're going to lose lean mass and they're going to get unhealthy. Whereas the better way to lose weight is only through nutritional ketosis. That means eat fat, a well-designed ketogenic diet, but don't eat carbs. So let's see if we can reconcile these two things. So Dr. Finney has put up on his website that this is 6 days of continuous fasting. He says that people, men and women, they have loss of protein, which is described as nitrogen loss. It reaches about 14 grams of nitrogen. And so if you multiply 14 by 28.3, because 1 gram of nitrogen will create that many grams of protein, you are losing about a pound of lean mass per day in the initial period of fasting. Very sobering, right? I mean, if you're losing that much muscle mass, you would say, man, this is not something that I want to do. And over a period of time, it slows down. It slows down to the point that you're losing only about half a pound of lean tissue after 7 to 10 days of continuously not eating. And he further goes on to say that if this is your lean mass out here at 100%, and if you fast for 60 days, you've lost 15% of your lean mass, which is sobering. So it's not just fat mass, you're losing 15% of your lean mass. And when you are faced with this data, you would take a step back and say, hey, I want to be very careful with what I am doing. Now, in addition to losing muscle mass, your metabolism is slowing down, okay? So the important thing is that if you're fasting for the first 3 days, what happens to your metabolism? Does it go up or does it go down? It goes up. The reason it goes up is because if our metabolism went down, we would never have been able to survive as species. Humans would have failed to exist because our food supply was not constant. We went through periods in which we had food, and when we didn't have food, we had to hunt to get the food. And if our metabolism went down, we would have had no energy to hunt. So the first 3 days, the body jacks up its hormone levels so that your metabolism goes up so that you have energy to hunt. After the first 3 days, the body goes into preservation mode and says, you dummy, you're probably doing something wrong. I'm going to slow down your metabolism. So there's a 30% reduction in basal metabolic rate. So if you do prolonged fasting, in 40 days, you will lose more muscle mass, and when you start eating, you will not put muscle mass, you will put on fat. So I am convinced as a physician that I don't want to recommend multi-day fasting for anyone. Okay, let me say that again. This is an important thing. I don't want to recommend multi-day fasting. Am I going over time, Nina? Sorry. No problem. So, hey, let me repeat that again. The important point I want to make here is that fasting is very important, but I do not recommend multi-day fasting. Okay, so I put these slides up together and I took time to prepare them. So our body has what is called a furnace and a thermostat. The larger your furnace, the higher your metabolic rate, the more you're burning. A muscular person has, my wife got very upset at me because she said that these slides are conveying a different message. I'm not trying to convey any message. All I'm trying to convey is that this person is muscular, he's got a lot of lean mass, and he's got a bigger furnace.
It's going downhill.
Okay. This is a thin person. He's got a smaller furnace, a tiny furnace. Fasting reduces your muscle mass and thus reduces the size of your furnace, especially multi-day fasting. So what is the secret sauce? So this is your furnace. How hot this furnace is burning, in other words, depends on the thermostat. So bigger furnace alone will not make a difference. You need to make the furnace burn hot. How do you make it burn hot? There are several factors that control it. Your thyroid hormone controls it. Exercise and movement keeps it hot. Food intake, in other words, fasting increases and eating decreases. Macronutrients, proteins probably increase your thermostat, whereas carbohydrates probably have no role in it. The type of fasting determines your thermostat. If you're fasting less than 18 hours, your thermostat goes up. If you're fasting more than 2 days, your thermostat probably goes down. There's a difference between heavy people and lean people. In heavy people with fasting, you turn down the thermostat much less than you turn it down in lean individuals, because the body is very smart. Before it loses muscle, before the body loses muscle, it's going to turn down the thermostat so that you don't lose muscle. So body has several preservation mechanisms. What are the factors that turn down the furnace? We already discussed your thyroid hormone going down, exercise. If you reduce your exercise, if you increase your food intake, the thermostat goes up. If you fast, it goes down. Macronutrients we talked about, fasting we talked about obese and lean. So the secret sauce is to not lose your muscle, keep your furnace hot and not turn it down. So in other words, keep your furnace size, keep it hot. That means don't lose muscle mass and don't reduce your basal metabolism. How are you going to do that? Okay, so I want to give credit to Dr. Finney. What he says is right. I think it's right because this is a series of experiments that were done in 1950s by a gentleman called Marlis. And what he did was that he divided people into 3 groups. I say 2, but it's actually 3 groups. And all of these people were doing fasting. But this group ate protein, 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight. So what does that translate to? Let's say I'm 70 kilograms. 1.5 would be about a little over 110 grams of protein. So I would say, I would recommend that people who are doing fasting have at least 100 grams of protein that day so that they are not activating lean tissue loss. So these people fasted for 21 days, and in that 21-day period, they ate 1.5 grams of protein every day. This shows the amount of net loss. So in other words, this is out here is showing how much protein they lost. They lost initially, but the body gets smarter. It turns down the thermostat so that you don't lose protein. So the protein loss was, the lean tissue loss was there in the beginning, but as time went by, the lean tissue loss stabilized. You didn't have any more loss. This is a group that started out at 1.5 grams, but every day the amount of protein that they were consuming reduced. So in other words, they are on a reduced protein diet over a 21-day period. What is happening to their protein loss? The protein loss is at that level and it remains high. And this is showing that the net protein loss in them was about 5% over that 21-day period. So there are 2 messages from this. One message is that don't do a fast without eating protein that day. Don't do a fast without eating protein that day. Number 2 is don't do a multi-day fast, especially with low protein, because you're going to lose lean tissue. In the 3rd group, these people fasted for 21 days. For 21 days they fasted and they lost muscle mass as shown out here. At the end of 21 days, for 7 days, they were given 1.5 grams of protein. The body has become very good at conserving protein loss. It's turned down protein loss. So what happened is that these people started gaining. They started gaining muscle mass because down here, the muscle mass is net protein gain in the last 7 days. So your body becomes good when you fast at preserving lean muscle and protecting you. So here it shows that group 1 on an average lost that much amount of nitrogen. You can multiply by that 30 and find out how much they lost in terms of lean mass. This is the group that did not eat for 21 days. So that's 167 grams of protein, and you can multiply that by 31 and get the amount of lean tissue they lost. So they lost quite a bit of tissue. So lean tissue loss with all protein fasting protocol shows that the least amount of loss happens when you have a protein sparing modified fast. So that's an important point, a protein sparing modified fast. Now I already told you, I put up these slides showing you that for the first 3 to 4 days, your resting metabolism, which is shown out here, your resting metabolism doesn't go down, it goes up because the body is giving you the fight or flight hormones so that you can be physically active. Your oxygen consumption is not going down while your weight is coming down because it's burning fat. This is a group of people that went through alternate day fasting, which is what we recommend. 18 hours of not eating any food, eat every other day, eat a low carb diet. These people did not eat a low carb diet, but what we found is that day 21 was their eat day, day 22 was their fasting day. So if you look up in here, this is fat oxidation. The fat burning was 54 grams on day 21, but look what happened to fat burning on day 22 when they were fasting. It doubled. Fat burning went up by 58%. What about carbohydrate burning? It was 184 here, it tanked down to 81. It went down by 53%. So if you do alternate day fastings, 18-hour fast, it's an important thing. What happened to muscle mass? I said you're going to burn muscle, but you're not going to burn muscle if you're doing short-term 18-hour fasts. Fat mass went down from 43 to 38, but your fat-free mass, which is your lean mass, remained at about 51.5. In fact, it went up a little bit. If you're losing a lot more fat and you're losing very little muscle, it's actually a good ratio, right? So that's where you want to be. Fasting insulin decreased by 57%. So you can see this is men out here. This is their eat day, and these people were not on a low carb diet. Their fasting insulin was high, but on the day that they were not eating, because for 22 days they were training their body, the insulin levels went down by 57%, both in men and in women. The important thing for you to realize is that these people are fasting for 72 hours and their insulin is falling quite dramatically. But what we want to know is that 70% of this drop is happening within the first 24 hours. In fact, it's happening within the first 18 hours. So that's why I say start eating at noon, stop eating at 6. Don't eat from 6 p.m. until the next noon. You're giving yourself an 18-hour window. You're going to preserve your lean muscle. You're going to preserve your metabolic rate. And you're going to drop your insulin and you're going to get health benefits. This is what Butterbob says. Insulin down by 50% in 72 hours, but 70% of that is happening in the first 24 hours of fasting. These are the Muslim people who practice Ramadan. For 30 days, they don't eat between sunrise and sunset. They don't even drink water. This study was done in Australia. You can find that the sugar dropped a little bit, but look at how much the insulin dropped in these people at the end of 30 days. A dramatic drop. So fasting is very powerful in improving your insulin function. As shown out here, that means your insulin resistance is going down. That means insulin function is better. And your insulin level is going down. Fasting increases insulin sensitivity, which means insulin works better, sevenfold better than a low carb diet in this study. So when you come to Megan Ramos has an intensive dietary management class. She says do intermittent fasting, and when you're eating, eat fat and cholesterol and a little bit of fiber. What can you drink? You can drink water, bone broth you can have if you're hungry because that has salt. Coffee you can have, green tea you can have, and this is my favorite, add a little bit of Himalayan pink salt, and that's permissible. What are the side effects? Multiple. When you start fasting, you're going to be cranky, headache, dizziness. You can get constipated, some of us. This does not happen. Gout does not happen because gout is related to, this is slides from Megan Ramos, so I don't agree with that, because one of the things that determines your uric acid is your insulin level. As your insulin levels fall, your uric acid levels fall. Gout improves. Acid reflux improves because you're not eating carbs. Okay, so I started out with that slide that showed the Roux-en-Y surgery. Fasting is Roux-en-Y surgery. Because when you're fasting, your GIP is not stimulated and your insulin levels don't go up. Your stomach size reduces. So rather than going out and spending this bunch of money and putting yourself at risk, if you truly want bariatric surgery, just fast. Okay? So my recommendations, fasting is an essential component of health, especially if insulin resistance is present. Low carb, high fat diet alone will not help in all individuals. 18-hour fasts, 3 to 5 days per week are perhaps best. When you're doing these fasts, you need to have protein sparing modified fast. Eat at least 100 grams of animal protein that day if you're not a vegetarian or a vegan. So protein sparing modified fast should have 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight. So if you are like, let's say 400 pounds, don't calculate that. You can calculate it as your ideal body weight. I think that's all I have. And we can have some questions, and I finished in time. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
You're drinking the water and the Himalayan salt. How much salt do you recommend? Is it by taste or?
Do you have high blood pressure?
No.
Then just enjoy however much you want. Because there is what is called natriuresis of fasting. Natriuresis means salt losing. The best way to increase salt loss in urine, the best way to treat your blood pressure is to reduce your insulin levels. Because when your insulin levels fall, the kidneys eliminate salt and you need more salt. Fasting is the most effective way to treat high blood pressure, not medications.
And you don't recommend an 18-hour fast every day of the week?
You can, just do it under supervision. I think if I had my resources, if I had things available to me, on everyone who comes to my program, I would put them through an IDEXA scanner. An IDEXA scanner tells me what is their fat percentage, what is their lean body mass. And I would see when they go on a low carb diet that their fat mass is reducing, their lean mass is being preserved. When they go on a fasting regimen, that the same thing is happening. So unfortunately, I don't have those resources. The handheld scanner that works through piezoelectric thing is simply not accurate enough. My co-program director, Bill Amonette, at University of Houston has a research method of calculating your fat mass. So when you come to the conference, this is shameless promotion. You should talk to Bill Amonette and say, I want to get in your study and measure my lean body mass and my fat mass. It's a good question. Yeah, go ahead. I'll come to you in a second. Go ahead.
Okay, I know you were saying that start fasting, say, from 6 p.m. till noon the next day.
No. Yeah, okay, yes. That's correct. That's correct.
So if you tend to take your insulin twice a day, because you're not too disciplined to take it at the same time. So basically what I'm thinking is the case is take the insulin, say, before 5 in the afternoon, eat, and then not take my insulin till the next day.
It's a little bit more complicated than that because it depends on whether you're just taking short-acting insulin or long-acting insulin. The long-acting insulin is your basal insulin. So you may have to figure out, see, this is very important, and that is that I wish that there was an endocrinologist in the area who would say, low-carb diet is the way to go. I'm going to work with you with your insulin regimen and turn down your insulin dose. We have somebody out here who can say that he has a physician who will do that. So what you need to do is to reduce your long-acting insulin because you're on a low-carb diet. I think within a couple of days you need to drop that down by about 50%. And if you're eating a true low-carb diet, you might need very little short-acting insulin. So like they say, there is no garden without the gardener. There is no garden without the gardener. There is no management of diabetes without the patient being involved and checking their sugars and making a decision how much insulin they need. The doctor will have no idea. You will know much better how much insulin you need than your physician will if you know your sugars, if you know what you're eating, and you plot them out and you spend time. The doctor is not going to have time looking at your glucose curves and how much insulin you take. So I implore all of you who are diabetics, when you go on this diet, to check your sugars multiple times, to consider dropping your diabetic medications and seeing if you really need them. I'm not giving individual medical advice. I'm protecting myself from liability. Yes, you had a question.
Yes, you said 3 to 5 days a week. I'm assuming they're in consecutive days?
Yes, they have to be.
Okay.
Because if they're not consecutive days, it doesn't work.
Right.
Right. So that's correct. So 3 to 5 days. Lean people who are very lean, perhaps don't need to push fasting as much. And if they push fasting, at least take adequate amounts of protein. Yes, David.
Or if you're very active as well, like I generally would do an intermittent fasting where I wouldn't eat until late afternoon. But since I've been increasing my workout load, I'm very hungry in the morning. So if you're working out a lot and you are hungry, you should probably eat as well.
I think that applies to Mr. Keegan also. You want to make a comment on that?
I ride a bike 4 days a week. I ride 45 to 50 miles per day. And if I don't eat breakfast, I'm not going anywhere. I tried it, it doesn't work. So I eat breakfast when I exercise. I haven't really tried fasting. I'm going to start trying to see if I can work it in on my non-ride days.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Trying to balance out. I mean, we talked about this the last time I was in to see Dr. Ali, is I run out of gas.
And because you're lean, you might run out of gas because the body is going to hold on to fat. So eating for you while you're riding is highly recommended. Absolutely. Yes, sir. David, come on.
On the days that you fast from noon to 6, is there
6
p.m. to next noon.
6 p.m. to noon.
I meant if
you
you
eat
eat
from-
from noon to 6.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a limit on how much you should eat during that period, or can you just eat?
Well, it depends on how lean you are. If you are very heavy, then I would not pig out. I would try to eat good, high quality protein, 100 grams. And since protein doesn't go down by itself, you should have small amounts of fat, about 30 grams of fat. So 2 tablespoons or 3 tablespoons of fat. So that's what I would do. I would eat a protein and fat meal if weight loss and insulin resistance is one of your primary goals. On the other hand, if you are lean and you want to fast, no meat, but I'm not preventing you from eating as much as you want. If you're losing weight, you're heavy, you're losing weight on an 18-hour fast by eating as much as you want in that 6-hour window, go ahead and eat. That's not a problem. You will notice that as you don't eat, you can't eat a large amount of food at one setting. In fact, there was a doctor who follows me, who comes and sees me, he's lost a lot of weight. It takes him 2 hours to eat one meal. 2 hours, because he cannot eat since his stomach size has reduced. So he'll eat, go half an hour and then eat, then go half an hour and eat. So he'll eat one meal in 4 settings. So I'll cut it out at one question after this, because the reason I have is that David is doing a very good adventure, and he's also shamelessly promoting our conference while he's doing that adventure. So I want him to get a little time to explain that. So one last question there, and then we will listen to David.
Thyroid disease.
So thyroid disease and medication. So I'm not giving you individual medical advice, but I can tell you that Hashimoto's disease, most of the thyroid diseases in this country are inflammatory disorders, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And that is a function of insulin resistance. Thyroid disease is a function of inflammation and insulin resistance. When you go on a low-carb diet, in majority of people, your thyroid improves, it gets better. Your requirement for thyroid medication goes down, or you need to stop taking thyroid medication because your thyroid heals.
You don't have a thyroid.
If you don't have a thyroid, you do need to take thyroid medication. There is absolutely no way around it. Yes.
So you get